everyone. It is Tuesday here at the Breakfast Club, and I am your host, Sister Danger. The topic that I have chosen for today is anonymity, and it seems to oscillate in and out of the limelight here on YouTube and the internet in general, but it was recently pushed back to the forefront of my brain between Professor, I think he's a professor, Moriarty's comment about the quashing of academic freedom in the recent video that went around the reasonable questions for anti-SJWs. And then in conjunction with Bering's Hangout live interview with the CEO of Candid and her comments relating to the AI that Candid employs in order to monitor the words and other posts, I guess, that are going across on its platform. If you haven't seen either of these videos, I'll just put the links in the low bar. You can check them out on your own time. My position on anonymity is not a favorable one, and that actually kind of seems to be in contrast with a lot of what I hear out there. I largely do not like it, and I find it overall more detrimental than it is beneficial to society, and I'll be explaining that here in a minute. That said, at the risk of being or sounding otherwise hypocritical, I just want to take a second to talk about my own YouTube handle and identity. I completely understand why people employ anonymity on the internet, and I myself do not typically share my name, although I have done that before. It's not a super secret or anything, and anybody who has 5 minutes in the wherewithal can probably figure out who I am. I just don't see any particular reason to help trolls save time on the internet. And so I have a handle and I use it and I appreciate its use. Not to mention, it's also good for branding. So now that that's out of the way, I just want to move on to the topic at hand, which is my argument against anonymity. The argument here is that the broad use of anonymity, it has an overall detrimental effect on society because at its core, it breaches the social contract. So before I get too into this, I want to sort of define some terms a little bit, and I want to make a distinction between privacy and necessary anonymity. Necessary anonymity is when a person feels that they must actually be or maintain anonymity in order to protect themselves. A person who must employ anonymity as some sort of form of shield or protection cannot be said to be making the decision to use that anonymity free of some form of coercion. They're not making the decision just to freely be private. They are forced by fear or some manner of repercussion to be anonymous. And this distinction is going to become important a little bit later on down the line. I am not attempting to sound pedantic. I just think in the next segments here that it's important to build the argument from the beginning, following the stages of thought throughout. I originally stated that the reason that I don't like anonymity is because I think that it is a breach of the social contract. For those who don't know, the social contract is one of the oldest philosophical ideas. It goes all the way back to Plato and Socrates, and it is essentially the agreement of people to set aside certain rights, which are typically the right of violence against others that you might otherwise have in the original state of nature without any form of government. It is the agreement of people to set aside those rights and to cede the authority of those rights to a governing body of some sort in order that people might come together and form a society for everybody's mutual benefit. Once the social contract has been formed, what it means is that the people have an obligation to adhere to whatever rules and strictures the society comes up with, and the governing body or person, whatever that may be, has the obligation to then provide for the protection and see to the administration of the rights that the people have ceded to its authority. In order for the social contract to have legitimacy as an agreement, it must be entered into free of coercion. This meaning that they are freely making the decision without being compelled by some external factor such as deceit, duress, threat, that would somehow change the decision that they may have made if those factors were not there putting pressure upon them. One of the attributes of being free of coercion means that a decision is being made knowledgeably, and that means that whoever is making the decision has access and is aware of factual, truthful information upon which they are making their decision. Without the existence of the truth or the determination of truth, we cannot be said to be making a free decision. Instead, our decision is being made either in ignorance or it is being manipulated in some way, shape, or form, such that if we had known what the actual facts or truth of the matter was, that we may have made a different decision. So truth and factuality are key components of knowledge, which is necessary to make free decisions and not coerced decisions. You may be wondering by now how any of this relates to anonymity. And the way that it relates is by way of identity. One of the methods amongst many that we have that we use to determine the veracity of knowledge, the truthfulness of what we know, is through identity. While these may not be the best or even reliable methods, in the absence of better methods to determine the truthfulness of things, we as people do our best to determine the truthfulness of statements that are being made by with a number of different factors. If, for example, you were to make a statement to me by which I had no other means to determine the truth of that statement than to try to in some way assess your character, then I might look to methods such as watching your body language, or what are your credentials? How does what you're saying align circumstantially with the scenario or the information that's being presented? Some argue that anonymity protects the ability of ideas to get out there. And while that may be true, what it also does, it subverts a part of the process by which we determine the truthfulness of the ideas that are being presented. It removes from us the ability to verify the accuracy of what is being said. When assertions are made from behind a veil of anonymity in such a way that it would cause another person damages, we are removing from ourselves one of the methods by which we are able to determine the veracity of these claims. And further, we are taking away from the person that is suffering under the assertions or accusations, we are removing from them their ability to seek redress. And it's clear that we associate these values and importance to identity in our society because we have certain safeguards and requirements that call for a person to be identified so that there can be accountability. And although this is a subtle distinction, people erroneously make the statement that anonymity allows people to freely express their opinions, but that is incorrect. All anonymity does is create a situation where an opinion can be expressed. If a person was truly free to express their opinion, then they would not need anonymity because there would be no reprisal to them for expressing that opinion. They are not free to express their opinion, they need anonymity. And to quote FDR, necessitous men are not free men. There is no situation in which necessary anonymity is not breaching the social contract. A person who needs to employ anonymity as a shield from behind which they are defaming somebody else or in some other way causing them harm is breaching the social contract because they are availing themselves of the protections of society whilst stripping the ability for the other person to seek justice for those harms that are coming to them. And at the same time, they are alleviating their own selves of any form of accountability. And if a person has to use anonymity in order to protect themselves from other people, then that means that the social contract is being breached upon them or toward them, as opposed to them breaching it towards another, because in some way they are being censured and subjugated. Their behavior is being curtailed not through due process or any sort of system of justice, but through basically a tyrannical fear of harm being done to them or their family, or that which enables them to create a livelihood for themselves or their family or whatever. Freedom of speech isn't free if there are consequences for it. And if a person cannot make the decision to divest themselves of their anonymity and put forth ideas and words, essays, thoughts, anything they want, if they cannot divest themselves safely of their anonymity, then their anonymity is not a liberator to them. It is an oppressor. It is something that they need, that they cannot operate without. It therefore creates a limitation on what they are able to do and say. Because if they were free, they wouldn't need to worry about that anonymity. If they must employ anonymity, that means that they are limited to what they can say and when and how they can say it. Another argument is that for people who are already oppressed, and a good example of this would be, say, homosexuals, when it was still illegal to be openly gay, that anonymity is a liberator for them. It allows them to find others of like mind in order that they might group together and in some way, shape, or form through numbers effect change. But I would argue that anonymity is not their liberator. It is only a tool by which they gain liberation. Because when they're done using that, like as a tool, right? They have found their people, they are now making a movement. They do not seek to gain their liberty and then still remain invisible. They seek to gain their liberty and become reputable members and citizens of society, and then be able to dispense or discard and do away with their anonymity and be open and out. So in this way, it is just a tool that helps them to achieve liberty. It is not liberty itself. It's not freedom in and of itself. Anonymity isn't really much of a worry until it crosses paths contentiously with someone else and real-world harm is affected. One of the attributes of the social contract is that where harm occurs, a person may seek legitimate rectification or justice for that harm. And when through anonymity, the ability to seek that reparation is removed, then we see miscarriages of justice. And this has a broad societal effect of eroding the trust between individual citizens and between the people and their government or ruling body. It basically undermines one of the major tenets that forms the fabric of society. When we cater to a landscape of necessary anonymity, we are enabling intellectual laziness. We are encouraging an atmosphere of distrust. This is why I don't think that necessary anonymity, except for perhaps as a short-term tool or stepping stone, has an overall benefit for society. Instead of catering to the laziness of emotional reactions, we should be fervent advocates and insist upon the fact that we are capable of entertaining ideas without necessarily adopting them. We can be detached from the things that we think about. There should not be a workaround to any kind of due process or a punishment for people for unpopular opinions by destroying their livelihoods. When we cave to the use of anonymity, we are enabling a situation whereby we are controlled by the fear of removal of that anonymity, lest we suffer ostracization or abuse for wrongthink. We should practice and insist on intellectual rigor and objectivity, emotional fortitude. We should insist that we are allowed and capable of holding personal opinions and beliefs without being forced to participate in the construction of a superficial social narrative by being made to represent or adopt the beliefs or value systems of our employers at the cost of not having a livelihood if we are caught doing something other than what is within their approved image. That a person may be held captive by anonymity at the risk of punishment or losing their livelihood makes them its prisoner, not it their liberator. That is my argument against anonymity, that when we are unable to divest ourselves of it, that it is indicative of a breach somewhere along the line in the social contract, either that breach is between citizens and each other or people and the government. And when we must use it of necessity, it is our oppressor, not our liberator. This is by no means comprehensive, but I felt that I had to truncate it in order to keep the video palatable. I know that there are a lot more nuances. I am interested in hearing other people's thoughts in the low bar, and please tune in tomorrow to see Nathan Brendan Masters, and let's see what he brings to the table for us. Everybody have a great Tuesday, and thank you for joining me here on The Breakfast Club. I hope you all have a great week, and I'll see you on the flip side.